Described by Ulster Unionist leader James Craig as the root of all evil, the Boundary Commission, convened in 1924, was a symbol of hope for nationalist Ireland and fear for Unionist Northern Ireland. Now, 100 years on, the Commission is the subject of a new book by Cormac Moore, who joins me, Paul Clark, for this UTV vodcast. Dr. Cormac Moore is historian in residence with Dublin City Council and has published widely on Irish history. His latest book looks at the Boundary Commission 100 years on, examining its creation, recommendations, failures and how its legacy has endured. So let's put this into context, Cormac. Explain briefly what the Irish Border Commission was.
The Irish Boundary Commission was set up as part of the Anglo-Irish Treaty to look at changing the contours of the border within Ireland. Northern Ireland had already been created and the Irish Free State was created under the treaty, and the whole idea of the Boundary Commission was to decide a new border area. Nationalists hoped they would get huge amounts of land and people transferred from the north to the south, particularly counties Tyrone and Fermanagh. Unionists did not want to give an inch of the 6 counties to the south.
And that is what spawned that mantra, not an inch.
Exactly, not an inch. It was James Craig stuck with that rigidly pretty much from the signing of the treaty in 1921 to the tripartite agreement in 1925 when the Boundary Commission report was shelved.
The wording of the clause in the treaty which created the 2 jurisdictions on this island was vague and ambiguous. Something similar was said after the signing of the agreement in 1998. Constructive ambiguity, it was called. Have we learned to live with that kind of language on this island after 100 years?
Well, maybe we have, but should we is the question, because the ambiguous language of the Boundary Commission led to all of the major problems, particularly for nationalists in the subsequent 4 years. It basically said that the border would be changed based on the wishes of the inhabitants as long as it was compatible with economic and geographic conditions. But it wasn't determined what was going to be more important, and what basis would geographic or economic conditions override the wishes of the inhabitants. That was not determined, and it was a serious flaw by Sinn Féin to agree to such a vague worded clause in the treaty. If we go forward to 1998 with the Good Friday Agreement, there are some nationalists who were very concerned about this idea of a border poll being called by a British Secretary of State, who, if the opinion poll suggests there's a majority who want a united Ireland, there would be a referendum, a border poll on unity or not. That's quite vague too. That's quite ambiguous. So I'm not sure. I know at the time it had to be ambiguous to get people over the line, but it does leave problems further down the road, as what happened with the Boundary Commission in 21.
And are we still living with that today, 100 years on?
Absolutely. I think nationalists in particular felt abandoned. They felt really let down by many sides, particularly the South, the Irish Free State at the time. And there still is that nervousness that they will be abandoned again, that they will be hung out to dry by the British government and even by the Irish government. So there is that feeling, that foreboding feeling that if something is ambiguous, that nationalists might lose out again.
What were the expectations of nationalists if the Border Commission or the Boundary Commission had implemented its findings?
Well, they were hoping that, and it was quite naive in my opinion, because you had 3 commissioners, 2 basically decided by unionist-leaning people, the British government and the Northern government, and 1 from the Free State. They still believed that they could get all of counties Tyrone and Fermanagh. They would get Derry City, they would get Newry, large parts of South Armagh, South Down, East Down, and what was left would be an unviable rump. And ultimately unity would come about very quickly afterwards. That was the hope and expectation of many nationalists. And that's why it wasn't scrutinised carefully enough at the time.
So in other words, if these parts of Northern Ireland had been ceded to the Irish Free State, it would have meant that the Northern Ireland at that time was unworkable.
I don't back that. I think it was workable, because if you look at Northern Ireland's economic kind of powerhouse was Belfast and its hinterlands. And Belfast and Antrim and North Down and so on, they were never under threat of being included in the Free State. Northern Ireland could have survived. Yeah, it would have been quite small, a lot smaller than it is, but it could have survived economically. Northern Ireland did not need Tyrone and Fermanagh to survive economically. So I don't buy this argument that many nationalists at the time had, that if it was a small entity, it could not have survived. It could have survived.
And was that the reason why Unionists did not approve of any movement on the border?
Well, they had been offered 9 counties under the Government of Ireland bill when it was drawn up in 1919, and they rejected that because they wanted a permanent majority. They felt if it had 9 counties, it would have been only 55% Protestant, 45% Catholics. It was too insecure, and they felt it would be outbred by Catholics, as was quoted at the time. Whereas 6 counties would have been, it was 2/3 Protestant, 1/3 Catholics. That seemed like a quite secure, stable position. And they didn't want to abandon loyalists in Tyrone and Fermanagh. Remember, they had already abandoned loyalists in Donegal, Cavan and Monaghan. They did not want to do the same with those in Tyrone and Fermanagh. So they were adamant to stick to that not an inch strategy. Now, some unionists, mind you, were happy for, say, South Armagh to go to the south, or some parts of Tyrone and Fermanagh, and in exchange they would get rich parts of East Donegal and North Monaghan, who had large unionist numbers in their ranks.
It's interesting to hear you say what you just said there about the border, not the Unionists not wanting to tinker with the border in any sense, because you look at the majority then, and 100 years on, that majority has disappeared.
It's gone, yeah. So you look at the main 2 voting blocks now. Nationalists at about 40%, Unionists at 40%. That's 2/3 majority is completely evaporated. So the dynamics have changed completely, and the security Unionists would have had post 1925. They were very insecure up to the Boundary Commission, and they were very worried about what land was going to be taken from them. But they were quite secure after the Boundary Commission report was shelved for quite a while, up until recent years when that majority has left them.
Did the Unionists get their own vote on the way on their own? Or was the British government at that time complicit in keeping Northern Ireland out of the Irish Free State and in the United Kingdom?
Oh, the British government was totally complicit. It often pretended it was kind of a neutral observer at 2 warring factions, but it was totally involved in making sure that if there was going to be changes to the boundary, it would be tiny rectifications. And particularly during 1924, when there was doubt that the Boundary Commission would meet at all, it was throughout the summer of that year, the British government, all British political parties, the British press in particular, put huge pressure on the stakeholders, whether it's the British government, the Irish Free State or Northern Ireland, to make sure that the border would only be tiny rectifications. They were supporting Ulster Unionists all the way. Now we have to remember, those Ulster Unionists at the time were very close to stakeholders. Edward Carson, although he was in the House of Lords and no longer involved in frontline politics with the North, he was very good friends with Winston Churchill, Lord Birkenhead, Arthur Balfour. Same with James Craig. James Craig had been in the British government up until 1921. He knew all the people there. They were good friends with those people. So it's only natural that they would have sided with the British side. And James Craig knew that. And he was very successful in lobbying and making sure he got people on his side, not just in politics, but within the British press as well.
So how did the Irish Free State feel?
Well, they were under a lot of pressure in 1924, particularly with all, and there was quite a lot of dishonesty going around as well within British press about what was agreed in the treaty. Many people claim that Michael Collins and Arthur Griffith knew it was only going to be small rectifications, but the Free State government said they wouldn't have signed the treaty unless it was going to be substantial transfers of land to the Free State. So they felt a lot of it was trickery, it was lies, it was underhanded dealings. But they were in a bind, really. They had committed to the treaty. On the letter, the British government were committed to the treaty as well. And they just had to roll with it as such. And that's what they did. But the outcome was not to their liking.
And what has been the long-term effect of that outcome on nationalism here?
So after the Morning Post, the Conservative-leaning newspaper, leaked what was essentially the correct prediction of what the new boundary is going to be, there was a huge furore in the South. And the President of the Executive Council, William T. Cosgrave, rushed over to London to have the Boundary Commission report shelved. For him to do that and for the British government to agree to that, they actually agreed to waive Article 5, which was a substantial public debt that the Irish Free State government owed the British government, around £150 million at the time. This was seen by Northern nationalists as a total abandonment for money just for the Free State. our people were no longer people of the North, but just the people of the 26 counties. So ever since then, although the nationalists in the North never trusted the British, after 1925, their trust in the South was completely evaporated. And that has continued to this day. And there's a huge gulf between what Northern nationalists think the South will do and what the South often says it will do.
Which brings me to the final question. Is the border still unfinished business?
Well, of course it is. You know, it's up for debate all of the time.
But it has fossilised over the last 100 years. It's still there.
It's still there. And it's been very resilient. Even Ulster Unionists at the time did not believe that Northern Ireland would exist for 100 years. James Craig, when he met Michael Collins in January 1922, he said, you know, Northern Ireland might exist for 20 years, 40 years, 50 years. I'm never going to walk through the doors of United Ireland Parliament. But, you know, he did not envisage 100 years. So it has been very resilient. And there's no certainty that, you know, a border poll will come soon or that it will lead to a decisive vote favouring United Ireland. So the partition exists, and it exists for the foreseeable future, maybe next 10 years or so anyway. But it still is an issue. It's a very hot issue. And as we said earlier on, the unionist majority is gone. So it's a lot more fluid now than it would have been 100 years ago.
It's a fascinating read. Cormac Moore, thank you very much indeed. And that book, The Root of All Evil, The Irish Boundary Commission, is available now. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and share, and you can catch up anytime on ITVX. Just search UTV News. Until the next time, goodbye.